Well, hello! Hey! Thanks for coming! Welcome to the third annual Carthage College Martin Gardner Celebration of Mind event. We're excited to have you here. This is the biggest crowd we've had for this event yet. It gets bigger every year, so thank you very much for your support. This is an exciting event for me. You're going to learn a little bit about Martin Gardner this evening, and we have a series of really exciting presentations, and we'll conclude with some interactive demonstrations up above. But I want you to know that this event is one of a multitude of events that are happening around the world today. The celebrations of mind happen all around the world. These are just the events that are happening in October. All meant to honor the legacy of Martin Gardner, an amateur mathematician, a skeptic, a magician. He wrote the annotated Alice in Wonderland. He was a true Renaissance man. And so around the world on October 21st, Martin Gardner's birthday, people come together to celebrate his legacy. So I wanted to give you first a little bit of a primer on what you're going to experience tonight, and then we'll show you a little videos to introduce you to Martin Gardner. So we have an exciting set of speakers for you this evening. First on our docket will be Peter Boie, who is on campus performing in the Student Union at 8 p.m. his show Summoning Spirits. And he's a skeptic, as was Martin Gardner. So tonight he's going to talk to you about how a skeptic approaches putting on a magic show that emulates a séance. This is Jeff Wagg from Chicago, the College of Curiosity. He's going to be talking to you about Franklin's bells, which will be curious. And Dr. Sara Jensen from the mathematics department is going to be talking to you about dead fish and jelly beans. All right. And I'll be telling you a little bit about the lurid history of parapsychology research. But first, a little bit about Martin Gardner.
Don't be fooled. Things are not what they seem. This is no ordinary celebration.
If this finger goes, obviously, this one should be able to go as well. If this one comes back, this one goes. If that one goes, the last one's just got to go. But of course, that's it's called sleight of hand, by the way.
Gathered here are some of the most intriguing people I've ever met. And they're all here to celebrate a modest, self-effacing writer, Martin Gardner. This is a story of the web of relations woven around him. A web of mystery, magic, and paradox. In Martin's world, everyone plays more than one role. There are acrobats who are mathematicians, and magicians who investigate the things that go bump in the night.
It appears to do absolutely remarkable things. Now, just by stroking it gently like this and doing a little bit of simple manipulation, you see it almost, the illusion is very strong. It appears as if it's getting flexible.
These are just a few of the extraordinary people who've been brought together by Martin and his writings.
How hard could it be? Right? All right, the first time I saw Martin Gardner was at the Morrison Hotel in Chicago. And he was demonstrating a trick that he'd invented called a passy sponge. And what he did was he covered each sponge with the back of his hand, and then one in the left hand, one in the right hand, and by doing that, it fooled me pretty badly.
My main interest in magic is because it arouses a sense of wonder about how things are, about the natural world. The universe is almost like a huge magic trick, and scientists are trying to figure out how it does what it does.
This, I'm sure, was in Martin's column sometime. You know, it's impossible to tie a knot without leaving go of the ends of the string the way I just did. But Martin will tell you many different ways of doing it.
There was one day where I got a letter from Martin that said, try putting marshmallows in a vacuum. What do you think will happen? When Martin tells you to do something, you know it's going to be interesting and that the results are going to be kind of counterintuitive. So if we now pump all the air out of this, what happens is that the marshmallows actually get larger instead of smaller. Now, if you let all the air back in, that's when they shrink down even smaller than when we started. So what's appealing about this is that it's this goofy thing to look at, but it really teaches you an interesting lesson in science, and there's something really kind of magical about watching these things get bigger. In fact, you can see how big they were when we started. Just kidding.
Sort of at the center of this huge collection of intersecting sets. Mathematics, and magic, and puzzles, and logic, and linguistics, and philosophy, theology, skepticism, and I'm certainly leaving out lots of things. But the point is that they all intersect on this one fascinating guy.
Years later, I saw him take a roll at a table, and he took the roll and which surprised me.
It's strictly been a hobby with me. I've never been a performer. The closest I ever came to getting paid for magic was when I was at the University of Chicago. During the Christmas season, I demonstrated magic sets at Marshall Fields.
To know that Martin's career as a performer was more extensive than that, you just have to see him in these black and white shorts made for early television.
Once you corral a man, gal, don't let him get away. Tie his wrists with a handkerchief, loop a rope around it, and lead him off. Whoops, she loses more men that way. Nothing wrong with that now, but watch his fingers as we view him from another angle. He grabs the rope with his fingertips, draws it forward, slips it over his right hand, it pulls out behind the handkerchief. Okay, try to get out of this one.
Well, these books are on mathematics. Except
Martin has not only written books on mathematics, puzzles, and magic. He's also written books on physics, philosophy, religion, literature, numerous magazine articles, short stories, volumes of poetry for children, and even a semi-autobiographical novel. Throughout his writings runs a playfulness and an intellectual curiosity that attracted leading scientists to his column in the magazine Scientific American. There, every month for 25 years, he brought his readers mathematics and much more.
This young lady, fingertips on top of table, table will follow the fingertips into the air, defying the laws of gravity, and impressing an impressionable young miss. How it's done in a moment. It's magic, all right, but the table is helped along in its rise by a couple rulers the boys have stuck up their sleeves and under the table edge. You can choose a variety of weapons, but ordinary rulers will do.
Black. Red. Red. There's a very good reason why you haven't heard of my ability to detect color with my fingertips. It's because I cheat. Martin has a long-standing interest in cheating, in exposing fraudulent psychics, in crank science. He's one of the founding members of the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, or PSICOP. James the Amazing Randy is also one of the founding members of PSICOP, and a longtime friend of Martin's.
This is a trick which was, now the way I do it is a trick. You see, it might be a divine miracle, the way other people do it, but if you'll watch this very carefully, I'm going to show you that you can manipulate it in such a way that it appears to do absolutely remarkable things. Now, just by stroking it gently like this and doing a little bit of simple manipulation, you see, almost the illusion is very strong. It appears as if it's getting flexible. People not knowing any better would think that it really is getting flexible and it's actually bending, but that's entirely an illusion. It has nothing to do with reality. It's all in your mind. Now, just holding it like this, you'll see that it gets so flexible that it actually appears to bend over to the untrained mind. And some people even swear that they see it turning at right angles, and that eventually the two pieces of the spoon
break into two pieces like that. I think that Martin Gardner and I probably got involved in the matter of investigating parapsychological and psychic and supernatural claims for about the same reason. We have a point of view of the magician. We know how people are fooled and how they fool themselves, which is even more important.
I've always been interested in offbeat science, and I don't know why, but when I was involved in high school, for example, I got involved in the creationist movement through books by a Seventh-day Adventist named George McCready Price, who wrote crank books attacking the theory of evolution. And it took me quite a while to figure out where he was wrong. And one of my early books is called Fads and Fallacies in the Name of Science. I think I wrote that in 1952. And it deals entirely with crank science.
This interest in crank science led to Martin's involvement in the investigation of alleged psychic phenomena, as in the case of Chicago bellhop Ted Serios, who claimed he could project his thoughts onto film.
The effect was, you bring your own Polaroid camera, you bring your own Polaroid film, you take a picture of him, he goes like this, and then something funny happens. You develop the Polaroid shot, and either it's a picture of me going like that, looking silly, but about, 4 or 5 times out of 100, it will be all black or all white, or a picture of a plane, or Cro-Magnon man, or a chair floating, some strange object.
Life magazine gave him 3 pages, big featured, and with no intimation that there was any fraud going on. This was great psychic Ted Serios. So a group of us got together and tried to figure out how Ted Serios was doing it. A group led by Charlie Reynolds, who at that time was picture editor of Popular Photography. And Charlie Reynolds decided to interview Ted and take some pictures. I suggested to Charlie he take Percy along as an assistant because Percy was so knowledgeable about magic.
Serios sometimes did the following. In order to focus the thought waves, he would take a piece of black paper and put it on his forehead, and he called it the gizmo, and he would sort of point it toward the camera to focus. And sometimes I noticed that the little gizmo wasn't exactly on his forehead. In fact, sometimes it was right in front of the mouth of the camera.
So for an hour or 2, absolutely nothing happened. They got nothing on Polaroid film. And they were watching very, very carefully. And at one point, at the end of the day, when everybody was tired and ready to go home, Percy saw Ted reach into his pocket and palm something out. And at that point, Percy said, "May we see what's in your hand, Ted?"
And I reached up and grabbed his hand. And then what's interesting is that a fist fight broke out. The 2 of us. But rather, some of the PhDs who were there just said, "You can't do this. This is an experiment." Stuff like that. But I had this death grip on his hand, and I wasn't letting go of it. He kind of stuffed his hand into his pocket and...
As Charlie Reynolds was to explain in his Popular Photography article, they believed that Ted Serios had used a small tube fitted with lenses that allowed him to project onto film images that he had previously cut out of slides.
Well, I think an important thing to realize is that science is on a continuum with good science, science everybody agrees is good science over at one end, and at the other end, crank science that everybody believes is crank. For example, nobody denies that a person who argues the earth is flat is doing reputable science. And in between is where the demarcation line gets very fuzzy and there are rooms for legitimate debate.
Perhaps what's most striking about Martin is his humility and his skepticism, both of which seem to be rooted in a deep feeling for life's mystery and the limits of our knowledge.
There are a lot of scientists who think that there's nothing really mysterious about the universe, and in just another century or so we'll solve all the problems of science. I belong to that group that thinks that we are very, very far from the frontier of knowing everything in science. And an Indian legend that I like, and I first ran across it in Carl Sandburg's book, The People Yes, where he repeats it. He says a white man drew a circle in the sand and said, "This is what the Indian knows." And then he drew another large circle, much larger than that, and he said, "This is what the white man knows." And the Indian took the stick and walked out about 100 yards and drew this gigantic circle and says, "This is where the Indian and white man know nothing."
Well, now that you know a little bit about who Martin Gardner was, let's have a series of discussions about things that fell in his wheelhouse. So first up on our docket this evening is Peter Boie, who is currently touring the country performing his show Summoning Spirits at colleges and universities all over the place, including Carthage College, tonight at 8 p.m. So it's my hope that after this event is done, we can all walk south to the Student Union Auditorium and enjoy Peter Boie's show. So please welcome Peter Boie.
This is a new experience for me. I normally have to do magic tricks when I'm in front of people, so speaking is a new thing. So this is cool. Thank you for having me. I wrote notes because I think better this way, and since I don't do this often, I was kind of go from this. Hi, my name's Peter. I'm a skeptic. I don't believe in magic, ghosts, or God. Yet I'm a magician who pretends to do magic. I also pretend to contact ghosts. In the show tonight, performing Student Union, 8 o'clock. Please come. I've yet to write a show about God, but I'll keep you posted on that one. When Tony asked me to speak today, I thought, wow, someone wants me to do talk about a magic trick. After I got over that shock, I had to think about what would I talk about that might be interesting. So I thought this question would be interesting for you guys. Why am I a skeptic performing a show about ghosts? For years, I had a desire to do an entire ghost-themed magic show, but after I came to the conclusion that ghosts weren't real, I had a moral dilemma. Do I make a show and convince people that ghosts exist for real? That would be wrong to try to convince people that ghosts are real since they don't. But then I thought, well, magic doesn't exist, but I still do a magic show. So I went with that. That's when I gave myself permission to do whatever I wanted to do on stage. One thing I learned about people years ago is that you can't change anybody's mind. So whether or not you believe in ghosts now, you'll still continue to believe in ghosts after I'm done, or not continue to believe them after I'm done as well. People change their own minds if they want to and when they're ready. So I stopped trying to worry about influencing people's thoughts and decided that I was just going to put on a theatrical show. It might seem hypocritical that someone who doesn't believe in ghosts is using them as subject matter for a show. After I perform, usually people come up to me and hang out and linger after the show or take pictures and we chat. And they usually start talking to me about their ghost experiences. And I have to be respectful, you know, I listen and hear what they have to say. And it's always interesting because they have some really cool stories, so I always like to hear them. But whenever they ask me about my ghost experiences, I always tell them I don't believe in ghosts. And that's when I get the double take. You're doing a show about ghosts and you don't believe in ghosts? And so that's always difficult to explain to them. But I usually get into some good conversations after the show if they ask me that. So I thought of two reasons why I do a show about ghosts. The first is I like really good dramatic stories. For instance, in my show, I have a story I tell about a woman that haunts a bridge in Vermont after her boyfriend stood her up and then she hung herself. What's more dramatic than that? Or how about a mother who haunts a house after her children die at birth and she haunts it in grief. These are all very dramatic stories, and they elicit all sorts of emotions, one of them being fear. Now I'm a self-described scaredy cat. I hate scary movies, but for some reason I like haunted houses. To me, movies are real. Haunted houses are just a fun, good, scary, adrenaline-filled time. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm watching these movies in my house and I don't want to think that there's crazy things around my house corners. Now, I would totally like to use real ghosts in my show. The problem is it might be a really long, boring, dull show. So that's the first reason, great stories and the feelings that they produce. The second reason is that supernatural stories allow me, a magician, tons of opportunities to weave magic effects around these stories. And I like creating magic with some sort of emotional impact or meaning, whether it's a joke or a story about a suicidal girlfriend. Now I've been performing magic for 24 years. To me, the pinnacle of magic as an art form is being able to weave a story, like I said, with some sort of meaning, seamlessly with a powerful magic effect. And I believe that formula has the greatest potential to create the most impactful theatrical experiences. So I've always been thriving for that, a seamless integration of great story and great magic. So those are my two reasons for creating a show about ghosts. I have to say, though, there are people out there who say they can really contact the dead. Mediums, psychics, ghost hunters portray ghosts as real on and off the stage. These people upset me a lot. They are wrong to say that they can do so. Some of them do it knowing they are lying to people, which is probably worse than the others who, I guess you call them shut-eyes, where they think they are really contacting ghosts, but they're just using well-documented techniques that they intuitively have learned over the years of doing this. Now, that whole subject could be an entire lecture, but just know that if someone's claiming that they're really contacting your dead grandmother, they're full of crap. And so they're definitely trying to scam you out of money. And what's even worse, though, is they're destroying memories and preying on your memories of a loved one that you've lost. So that being said, I hope you all come to my show where I talk to ghosts. 8 o'clock tonight. So that's kind of what I had to say. Does anyone have any questions about what I do, being a magician, doing a ghost show, anything I talked about? I guess open it up for some sort of little Q&A if you have anything. If not, sure.
In the scheme of things, with the universe or multiple universes as large as they are, and our physical being is going to be probably something different in some other location. What happens if something would be all of a sudden present in your environment that was an alien or kind of like a ghost? How would you handle that?
I'd probably run. I'd be scared. As I said, I'm a scaredy cat. That'd be fascinating. That would be fascinating. I would try to take a picture of it, maybe, to show other people so they don't think I'm crazy when I talk about it. Then that would be fascinating if I met an alien or some sort of being that wasn't, part of being a skeptic is, relying on your evidence, but also keeping an open mind. So it's not that I'm not open to being ghosts, it's just I've never seen any solid evidence that ghosts actually exist. If there was evidence, if I literally could see one and someone standing next to me could see the same thing and maybe repeatable over time, then I would believe in ghosts. So, yeah.
Have you looked for any evidence of ghosts? Have you found anything that maybe made you question yourself for a second?
These stories that people tell, she asked if anything has made me question my belief that there aren't ghosts. Personally, no. Although there was this, I was doing summoning spirits in an old mansion, haunted mansion, on a campus in Vermont. And there's this little tiny theater, little black box, and in the back of the room there was this dramatic pause in my presentation. All of a sudden the door just... Now, I got shivers, that was creepy, and definitely gave me the feeling like there's a ghost in the room, but, you know, it's obviously it's not provable that it was a ghost. So, there's things like that, yeah, definitely make me question, like, was that a ghost, you know? But then I come back to my reality and I say, and think of it in more, scientific terms, and I could probably come up with an explanation for why that happened. So, and there are some really great stories that people tell me after the show where I get caught up in. Just because these stories aren't necessarily real and ghosts don't exist doesn't make the feelings that they give you any less real. That's what I'm after. I'm after real feelings, but false situations, and that's the type of ride I like to go on in the show. Good question. Yes.
Then I must ask, what do you believe happens after death, personally?
What do I believe that happens after death? I think it's nothing. I think it's what happens before we're born. I don't remember it. I don't have any conscious memories of that, so I think that's what happens. Yeah.
What kind of inspired your path to want to do that, and specifically just in regards to?
All right. What inspired my path to magic and also doing this ghost show? I was 11 years old and I had a lot of time on my hands. So I started finding magic books at the library. Now you can go to YouTube. And I just started learning card tricks. I really like being creative. I like working with my hands, building things. I love the whole sleight of hand dexterity aspect of it. And so that's how I got into magic. And I just really, fell in love with it. Got paid to do my first show when I was 16. And so after that, I was like, they're giving me money to do this thing. And then the ghost show, I added a ghost trick into the show about 8 years ago, into my normal show. I do 2 shows. This one's summoning spirits, and then I do a more kind of traditional magic show, comedy, light, interactive show called Peter Boie, Magician for Non-Believers. Nothing to do with my skepticism of God or whatnot, but just meaning that you don't have to believe in magic to enjoy a good magic show. That's basically the idea. And so I added that ghost trick in years ago, and it just got amazing reactions. And I really loved the whole thing about it. It had a great story, a great trick. It really gave you a crazy feeling inside for the audience. And a year or two after that, I just had this idea: what if I did a whole show just kind of really theatrically around ghost stories? And that's eventually it turned into this. 2 years ago, I created this show. So. Yes.
What do you think the distinction is, or is there one, between magician and illusionist?
Is there a distinction between magician and illusionist? No, we use those terms pretty interchangeably. It just depends on what people want to be referred to. Like an illusion, there's many different types of illusions: psychological illusions, visual illusions. So no, I kind of use those interchangeably. I don't call myself an illusionist, I call myself a magician. I do tricks. But I guess it's just a matter of semantics, what you want to call yourself. In regards to being a magician, in regards to a real definition, obviously those are a little different. So. Any other questions? Oh, yes, you.
Do you have a favorite, ghost hunters or Teresa Caputo? Who's the one, TV reality person that you like to make fun of? Do you have one? That you jab at the most?
I don't normally do talks like this, so if I do any jabbing, they're usually just private conversations. I haven't really devoted any time really to going out and trying to bust psychics and all that stuff. So whenever I just see it, I just feel bad for the people that are being taken advantage of, these people, really. I kind of feel more sad about it, and that they're taking advantage of people. I guess John Edwards would be the popular one to make fun of. So I guess he's my go-to when I have to make a joke.
I'll ask one question.
Sure.
So among magicians and mentalists, there's this ethical debate. about if we're doing a show where we're feigning to have psychic abilities or contacting the dead, should we have a disclaimer at the beginning of our show saying everything you're going to see is theatrical, there's deception involved. So the question is, do you do a disclaimer? And second, do you believe that there's any impact of a disclaimer to begin with?
No, I don't think there's an impact of disclaimer. People who are, like I said, people are going to believe what they want to believe no matter what you tell them. They'll either, for example, I did, like I said, I did a ghost trick in my regular show. Now my regular show is fun, comedy. I'm doing magic tricks, you know, they're obvious, there's cards, there's, you know, straight jacket, very obvious, you know, non-ghost props. And then after the show, people would come up to me and say, oh, the great show, but that ghost thing, if I tried that at home, would it actually work? You know, this is in the context of a regular magic show. So, no, I don't believe people need to do a disclaimer. I don't believe it's necessary ethically to do a disclaimer because you're on a stage. Unless you're billing yourself as a lecturer, that's different. If you're billing it as a theatrical production, you know, you don't need a disclaimer. I think it's self-evident. But I do have a very light, I wouldn't call it a disclaimer. Well, in the beginning, I do a quick opening monologue. Welcome to the show. So I kind of like ghost stories. I have a love-hate relationship with being scared, though I kind of love to hate it. So I thought, what better way to conquer my fears than to make them my best friends? Maybe I love these stories so much because I'm a hardcore skeptic, and it's hard even for me to completely dismiss them. But it's true, you hear a story, sometimes I'm like, wow, I believe in ghosts. And then a minute later I'm like, no, don't do that. And so that's kind of my, I wouldn't call it a disclaimer because I just want to be honest with people in the show and give them that slight bit of perspective on where I'm coming from. And that if you're a skeptic, it kind of gives skeptics and non-believers permission to enjoy the show, and then people, you know, so yeah.
Well, let's thank Peter Boie. I completely dropped the ball in my introduction. You may know Peter Boie from his recent appearance on the Penn and Teller Fool Us show.
Thank you. Cool. Well, thanks for having me.
And we'll all see him at 8 p.m.
Yeah, I would love to stay. I have to go sound check.
Right. Break a leg.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm up now, and I realize I also haven't introduced myself to you. I'm Tony Barnhart, here from the Department of Psychological Science, and I organize this event every year. And this year, I'm kind of following up on a theme that I started last year. But you need not have been here last year to appreciate what I'm about to tell you. So, today I am presenting the lurid history of modern parapsychology research. So there's a long history in studying paranormal phenomena, including hauntings and psychokinetic abilities where people claim they can manipulate objects with their minds, or clairvoyance, the ability to see the future, things like this. Parapsychology is the scientific study of interactions between living organisms and the external environment that seem to transcend the known laws of nature. And for me as a scientist, this seems kind of backwards, because by nature, science can only study natural events. And so it seems unusual to me that we would try to delve into things that are, by their very definition, not natural. But with that caveat in mind, I'm going to tell you a little bit about modern parapsychology research and some of the flaws that have shown up along the way. But before I get there, I want to start at the turn of the 20th century. In 1912, Finn published a book, The 7 Follies of Science, in which he listed what he saw as the most generally accepted and discredited scientific ideas of the time. And here are some of the things on the list. They will be very foreign to you because these are topics that are no longer debated, that are just accepted to be mostly nonsense. So the first 3 that you see are sort of geometric theories. The fourth is a question of physics that's actually still alive and well. If you Google perpetual motion on YouTube, you'll find some very funny things. Number 5 and 6 are sort of chemical issues that aren't around so much anymore, although while I was preparing for this talk, I did some Googling and I found a forum that is devoted to modern alchemy. And the last one, the elixir of life, I don't know how to classify that one. I guess that would just be another paranormal thing. So a lot of these issues aren't debated anymore, with the exception of alchemy, maybe. I've heard of a few alchemists, and I've met one person who believes there to be an elixir of life. David Copperfield. He claims he has it on his island. I'm being serious. So, about 50 years later, Martin Gardner wrote his book, Fads and Fallacies in the Name of Science, wherein he tried to come up with a similar list of debatable topics in science. A lot of these are still alive and well. Unfortunately, flat earthism is back. That one was a surprise, wasn't it? Hollow earthism, maybe not so much. Atlantis, we don't talk about much. Homeopathy, gosh, still alive and well. We can't seem to get rid of that one, despite the fact that there's no scientific evidence to support its efficacy. Reincarnation, still alive and well in some places. ESP, dowsing I handled last year at this meeting. So, today we are going to try to decide whether we can add ESP to the list of fads and fallacies that have been debunked. So when last we met, a year ago, I told you about the founding of the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, of which Martin Gardner was one of the founding members, along with James Randi in that picture on the right. I also went back in time and told you about the founding of the American Society for Psychical Research, that was founded by some of the really prolific movers and shakers in early psychology, who very quickly disbanded from the group when they realized that the group had ulterior motives to find evidence for their beliefs about the world rather than to do effective science. Well, today I am continuing forward in the 70s, and I want to tell you about some of the research that happened at Stanford back in the 70s that surrounded a character that you may be familiar with, Uri Geller. His name was invoked in the early video. He was a young Israeli who came to the United States in the 60s and claimed to have many impressive abilities. He claimed that he could bend metal with his mind. He'd frequently be seen bending spoons and keys with his mind. He claimed that he could transport his consciousness elsewhere to see things in different places and at different times. And he claimed that he could read people's minds from afar. And a pair of physicists at Stanford, Targ and Puthoff, there in the picture, decided to put this to the test. But, spoiler alert, these were physicists. These were people who are not used to collecting data from human participants. Most of the things that physicists study aren't apt to deceive them, right? But humans are apt to deceive scientists. And so, Targ and Puthoff really weren't capable of detecting when they were being deceived, or even being prepared to look out for deception. So I have a little video to show you about some of the science that they were trying to do at the Stanford Research Institute in the 70s, that they ultimately published in the journal Nature. You can't publish in a more high-profile place than Nature. So here is a little bit about Targ and Puthoff. This is a video produced by them.
Stanford Research Institute has been conducting an experimental program in the field of psychoenergetic effects. We do not seek only to add to a catalog of interesting events. Rather, the purpose is to apply objective scientific analysis in the study of these reported phenomena to determine whether a pattern of cause and effect relationships can be established of the type more familiar in the physical sciences. This film describes a 5-week investigation conducted at Stanford Research Institute with Uri Geller, a young Israeli. The film portrays experiments that we performed with him just as they were carried out. Each scene has been taken from film footage made during actual experiments. Nothing has been restaged or specially created. It is not the purpose of the film to demonstrate any purported psychic abilities of Mr. Geller, but rather to demonstrate the experiments done with him and his response to the experimental situation. This is Uri Geller. One of the types of demonstrations that Geller likes to do is to sit with a group of people and attempt to send a number to various people in the room. With Uri Geller, this is Edgar Mitchell, who, with his eyes covered, is trying to pick up the number that Geller is sending. Also, we see Wilbur Franklin of Kent State, Harold Putoff, and Russell Targ of SRI, along with Don Schuich, Vice President for Research at SRI. Dr. Schuich is trying to receive and then write down the number that Geller is sending. In this case, Schuich is successful in picking up the number. Of course, this is not a laboratory experiment since the activity is completely under Geller's control. Here we show a series of experiments where previously 15 drawings were placed in double-sealed envelopes in a safe for which none of the experimenters had the combination. It took signatures of both the key researchers to remove a drawing at random from the collection in the safe. One of the researchers would then, in this case Targ, look at the drawing outside the experimental room, reseal the envelope, enter the experimental room, whence Geller's task was to draw what he perceived in the envelope. This is Geller's representation of what he believed was sealed in the envelope. At no time during these experiments did he have any advanced knowledge of the target material. As far as he is concerned, these could be drawings of any kind, whether a design or a representational picture. In fact, this is the most off-target of the drawings that he did. Here, the experiment is repeated, this time with Putoff as a sender, just to check that the identity of the sender is of no significance in the experiment. Additionally, all experiments are tape recorded to guard against any verbal cueing on the part of the experimenters. This is a drawing that Geller has made to correspond to the target object. The rectangle on the clipboard represents the TV screen in Geller's mind on which he claims to project the image he is trying to draw. As you can see, he is quite elated about getting the right answer. Before he does this, it is usually preceded by several minutes of, "I can't do this, it's impossible, I want to stop, let's wait."
All right, so if true, friggin' remarkable, right? I mean, that would be truly impressive, and that would overturn everything we think we know about information transfer and physics. Of course, that video was in fact edited by Targ and Putoff, and it was edited in some rather creative ways. It's true, they were not lying when they said that nothing was staged and nothing was added or taken away. Well, no, they didn't say anything wasn't taken away. In fact, a lot was taken away. That was a heavily edited piece of footage. And the technique that was demonstrated in there was a little bit different than the one that they published in Nature. So, as you can see from the title, it was about information transfer under conditions of sensory shielding. So it was about remote viewing. They would put Geller in one room with a notepad to write out his thoughts. And Targ or Putoff would usually start in the adjacent room and draw something on a sheet of paper and then put it in a pair of envelopes, like you saw there. And Geller's job was to remotely view and reproduce the drawing by the participant in the adjacent room. Here are a set of the images. I don't know how these will show up on our screens here. These are from the Nature publication, what you see is on the top of each image is what was being sent, and the second image is Geller's response, the thing that Geller drew in this shielded room. So you see in pane B a pair of grapes that was the target, and Geller drew a pair of grapes on the right. In pane C you see a thing like a devil, and on the right it's kind of hard to make out. You see some sort of satanic type flames and things like that. The camel one is pretty good. The person was drawing a camel, and Geller reproduced a horse. So rather impressive. So impressive that a number of scientists decided they should look into what methods were being used by Targ and Puthoff. One thing you should know is that Targ was often the one who was seated in the room with Geller, usually holding the envelope and trying to send his thought. And this is important because Targ was legally blind. He was legally blind. And so he had no real good way to evaluate visually what Geller was doing in that room at any point in time. After a visit to the lab by a few other scientists, Marx and Kamen noted some problematic features of the experimental setting that were not mentioned in the Nature article, that didn't make their way in there. For example, there was a hole in the wall between the two rooms, the room where the drawing occurred initially and the room where Geller was trying to receive these thoughts. And that hole was plugged with a cotton ball. They could have easily been removed by Geller. That's bad science. Also, Geller had access to an intercom where he could have listened in to what was happening in the adjacent room if they were discussing what the drawing was. Hugely problematic. No controls put in place to address these things. Furthermore, later on, Marx decided to try to emulate the experiment with some of his participants, but not using any kind of psychic ability. He gave them an envelope that had inside it a second envelope that had inside it a drawing. And the drawings were drawings that were known to be used with the Geller experiments. And he gave people these envelopes, and he gave them 5 or 10 seconds to just inspect the envelopes and see if they could figure out what was inside them. Keep in mind, the whole premise of the Geller experiment was that the image was tightly locked inside these opaque envelopes. Well, in the leftmost pane of this graphic are the target images, the things that were in envelopes that were used with Geller. In the second pane is a depiction of how these could have been folded up to be inside the envelope. In the third pane are Geller's reproductions of these drawings. And in the next 2 panes are drawings of non-psychic controls who were given 5 or 10 seconds to inspect these secure envelopes inside other envelopes. And you can see that these non-psychic controls did a remarkable job drawing what was inside the envelope without any psychic ability at all. It seems like their envelope-in-an-envelope controls were terribly inadequate controls. Really scary. And bad science, ultimately. Another thing that wasn't mentioned in the video was that for these 3 images, Geller took 11 and a half minutes to reconstruct the first one, 85 minutes to draw the second one, and 18 minutes to draw the third one. He had a lot of time with those envelopes. Just saying. Okay, so fast forward a few more years, and James Randi enters the scene. He was on the scene when Geller was doing this, and he was sending notes to Targ and Puthoff with some suggestions about controls they could put in place to safeguard against deception. But obviously, that advice fell on deaf ears, because Targ and Puthoff did not implement any of these controls. And so, James Randi decided to fight fire with fire. And he constructed something known as Project Alpha. One of the hotbeds of parapsychology research was at Washington University in St. Louis, the McDonnell Research Lab. And Randi approached 2 unknown young magicians with an idea. They should approach this research lab and pretend to be psychics. Say, hey, we're psychics, study us. And they should participate in all the experiments, try to manipulate the outcomes whenever they can to show that the researchers are not using stringent controls. And if ever they're asked whether they are cheating or using deception, they're to break character and say, yes, we are cheating and we were sent here by James Randi. Well, this sort of fell flat because these two young magicians ended up being studied at the McDonnell Research Lab for 3 years without ever being asked whether they were using deception, and while producing all sorts of positive effects along the way that suggested they had psychic abilities. So after 3 years had passed, they decided they couldn't go on any longer, they were never going to be asked, and so they came clean. If you want to know more about this Project Alpha, you will learn a lot in the documentary An Honest Liar, which I believe is available on Netflix. It's a great documentary about James Randi and his life. So these are just two examples of the faulty, flawed techniques that have been center stage in parapsychology for decades. And it seems like parapsychology isn't terribly interested in fixing its ways too much. One of the prominent parapsychologists, Thalborn, said, if a researcher believes that a subject has produced convincing evidence of psychic phenomena elsewhere, then the discovery of a fraudulent act does not necessarily vitiate the results of other tests conducted under different conditions. So parapsychologists are actually willing to turn a blind eye to deceptive activity in their participants. A little bit terrifying. So I'm gonna end soon, but I want to introduce you to something that's very modern, something that happened just a few years ago, that will actually be echoed in Dr. Jensen's talk momentarily. This is Daryl Bem. He's a very famous social psychologist. You may have heard of the Bem sex role inventory. That's one of the things he's famous for as a social psychologist. But he's also a parapsychologist and a magician, which is odd to both know techniques of magic but also believe in psychic phenomena. And he, a few years back, published some parapsychology research in the most high-profile journal of social psychology that there is. And in this research, he suggested that people who don't claim to have any psychic abilities could in fact see the future. Their job was to monitor a computer screen, and on either side of the computer screen was a digital curtain. And a stimulus was going to appear behind one of those curtains. Unbeknownst to participants, the decision about where that stimulus would be made, would appear, wasn't made until they pressed a button. So they were literally trying to see the future. They would decide where the stimulus was going to appear, they'd press a button, and then they'd see whether they were correct. And an image would appear behind one of the curtains. Well, Bem showed that people could, just above chance, predict where that image would show up if it was an erotic image. Because erotic images, I guess, are more, emotionally valenced and have more, are more easily transferred through the ether. I don't know what the logic was, but it got published in the most high-profile social psychology journal that there is. Well, it turns out there were some huge statistical problems. While his science was perfectly good, his statistics were deeply questionable. It turns out he committed something known as the multiple comparisons problem. He tested lots of variables and reported the ones that seemed to produce an effect. So his primary experiment included manipulations that were probably designed with hypotheses in mind, but these hypotheses were never communicated, and the correct statistical adjustments were never made to accommodate multiple comparisons. So in fact, the groups of pictures that he showed included the erotic images that were important, but also neutral images, negative pictures, positive pictures, romantic pictures. None of those produced an effect, only the erotic images. And he hung his hat on that one finding, which could have very easily been a false positive, given some quirks of statistics that Dr. Jensen will talk about momentarily. Not to do a hit on Daryl Bem, but he also advises people on how to do science writing. And in one of his, in his book on science writing, on page 4, He talks about how you should handle your data to counteract the fact that most researchers don't actually have contact with their participants. We have research assistants who do that. So how should we actually get some knowledge about our participants? Well, he says, to compensate for this remoteness, let us at least become intimately familiar with the record of their behavior, the data. Examine them from every angle. Analyze the sexes separately. Make up new composite indexes. If a datum suggests a new hypothesis, try to find further evidence for it elsewhere in the data. If you see dim traces of interesting patterns, try to reorganize the data to bring them into bolder relief. If there are participants you don't like, or trials, observers, or interviewers who gave you anomalous results, place them aside temporarily and see if any coherent patterns emerge. Go on a fishing expedition for something, anything interesting. Bob, what do you think about that? Bob teaches statistics here at Carthage.
It's pretty funny.
It is not best practice. It is a recipe for finding false positives, for finding results that are not valid results. And this seems to be a hallmark of parapsychology research. So why does this matter? Isn't this psychic stuff all in good fun, or people don't seem to be largely harmed by Uri Geller's claims that he can bend spoons with his mind? Well, Martin Gardner had a good answer to this question. He said, I'm not sure why I enjoy debunking. Part of it surely is amusement over the follies of true believers, and it's partly because attacking bogus science is a painless way to learn good science. You have to know something about relativity theory, for example, to know where opponents of Einstein go wrong. Another reason for debunking is that bad science contributes to the steady dumbing down of our nation. Crude beliefs get transmitted to political leaders, and the result is considerable damage to society. I think those words have important meaning today. So that is all I have for you. I would like to move on to our next speaker. Let me go back to a different slide that we can keep up while he's chatting. I'm really excited to have our next speaker here. He has come a very long way to speak to you. He flew in from Houston yesterday to be at this event. And he'll tell you more about why he was in Houston. But Jeff Wag is the curator of the of the College of Curiosity in Chicago, which he'll tell you a little bit more about. And he is the only person on tonight's program who actually had contact with Martin Gardner. He had conversations with Martin Gardner as part of his role working with the James Randi Educational Foundation. So I'm really excited to have Jeff Wag with us tonight. Take it away, Jeff.
Lest you think that Martin Gardner and I were close friends, my conversations with him were something like, hello, James Randi Educational Foundation. Hi, this is Martin. Is Randy there? Yes, sir, just 1 minute. And that's about it. However, I knew that he had a very close relationship with Randy, and they were inseparable, and when Martin finally passed, Randy was beside himself. But Martin's family did something very nice. They gave Randy his writing table where he had written all these books. So that is still in Randy's collection today. But before I get started, I have to say, I literally just flew in from Houston, and it's because I'm currently deployed with Team Rubicon, and I have to give a little plug to Team Rubicon. Has anyone heard of Team Rubicon? If you lived in Texas or Florida, you would know who Team Rubicon is. It's a volunteer organization that goes and helps people who have had natural disasters. So we're currently deployed in Houston and Puerto Rico. And what we do is we go and fill the gaps where FEMA and government organizations can't do anything. So currently we have 6 operations going on in Texas where we're going from home to home, helping them tear down their wet drywall, removing all the wet carpet, helping families that don't have any way to help themselves get out of the situation because most people don't have flood insurance. So I have to thank Team Rubicon for flying me here from Houston just to talk to you folks. And that's why I'm dressed like this. This is the typical Team Rubicon uniform. So, if you want to learn more about Team Rubicon, you might have seen our ads on ESPN, and we're getting to be rather popular as the number of natural disasters increases. Google Team Rubicon. It is a wonderful organization, all volunteers, with a special emphasis on veterans. And I highly recommend that if you have some spare time, that you look into donating something to Team Rubicon. That said, I'm here to talk about curiosity. The root of the word curiosity is the Latin word cure. You may notice that sounds like other words. It sounds like cure, I do believe there is a cure in curiosity, literally. Also, it is related to the word caring. In fact, back in Latin days, curiosity and caring were kind of the same thing. And if you think about it, curiosity is caring about something. Well, I care about a great many things, and right now I care about something very important. And that is that I failed to notify Anthony of my needs for this demonstration. So I actually have to perform an impromptu magic trick. This is the best kind of magic trick. It's the kind of trick that you don't know you have to perform and you have to come up with something right away. So I need 2 volunteers. Anybody? Come on down. I need 2 volunteers. Raise your hand. Come on. There's one. Who else is brave? Come on. I'm not going to make fun of you or anything. Thank you very much. Notice it's the women who are brave enough to volunteer. Okay, come on right down here. Thank you very much. What I need to do is I need somehow to have a table materialize right here. Okay? I think the best way to do this is to use physics and perhaps your back muscles. If you folks would grab that little table right there, bring it over here. I think that's the best example of magic possible. We've solved the problem. I can continue on with my demonstration. So, I am no longer representing Team Rubicon. I am representing College of Curiosity. So let me get into my official College of Curiosity. Thank you very much. Round of applause. Okay, College of Curiosity. College is, even though it's in a collegiate script, the College of Curiosity is not an educational institution. It is a group of like-minded people. If you're a curious person, you are part of the College of Curiosity. My official uniform includes a pith helmet. Why? I like it. It's actually fairly comfortable. But there's another reason. Because if you go around town dressed like this, and I will be right back for those of you who can see, people ask you, why are you dressed like you're going on safari? And I say, because if you dress for safari, safari happens. So, safari is an old word that means, anyone else what safari means? Word? It just means to travel. We're going to travel right now, back in time, and learn a few things that we thought we knew and that we actually don't. Who invented electricity?
Tesla.
Edison, Tesla. Any other names? Go back a little bit more in time.
No one.
That is correct. No one invented electricity. What name do we most associate with electricity?
Lightning.
Would that be Mr. or Mrs. Lightning? No one said the name. Come on now. Ben Franklin. And why do we associate Ben Franklin with electricity?
The king.
Because he went out in a storm, attached a key to a kite, and flew it, and then what happened? Well, the story is that lightning hit the key, and he was like, oh! Electricity, lightning, same thing. But there's a weird thing about this story. It's actually not that weird if you study history at all. It's not true. It can't be true, because if that happened, he'd be dead. And we happen to know that he actually lived beyond that event, because he made it onto the $50 bill. So, we know that while Franklin is associated with electricity, some of the stories we have from him are actually not true. What is all this? All right, let's figure this out. So, Franklin was very, very interested in electricity, though, and he wasn't by any means the first. Here's a homework assignment for you. When you get home, Google the term Baghdad battery. Anyone familiar with the Baghdad battery? Fascinating thing. No one's really sure what's going on with the Baghdad battery, but it does demonstrate the fact that people were aware of and experimenting with electricity a very, very long time ago. In short, it's basically appears to be a chemical battery about 2,000 years old. A little hard to explain that. Now, Franklin was concerned with electricity not only as a curiosity, but also because it was dangerous. Just as now, people could get hit by lightning and die, or people's houses would catch on fire. So, in his experiments, he was trying to find a way not only to, this will all make sense, I promise, to find a way to detect lightning and also to defeat it. I apologize, I have a little bit of a cold, so bear with me. So, Franklin was in constant communication with the French about electricity. He was writing them letters and writing them letters back. And he had this idea. He kind of knew that electricity was an imbalance between electrons. Electrons is an old Greek word showing, again, that our study of electricity is ancient. And he had this idea, so what if we could create a rod, a metal rod, and stick it up in the sky so that lightning would hit it, and then stick it in the ground, and then attach it, or not attach it, keep it next to another wire like this, and then if it's electricity, there should be a spark because of the differential. Well, no one really knew how to get that rod up there, and Franklin had sent this letter off and ignored it. Little did he know that in France his letter was a phenomenon. It was translated into French, and a scientist in France actually did the experiment. This is essentially the kite with the key experiment. The French did it first. They also invented the airplane first. That's another story. But it doesn't matter. Franklin was a big guy back then, as he is now, and he got his name on everything. So he got credit for this experiment that was actually done by the French. But knowing that, he was like, well, what if we could detect lightning? What if we could detect that lightning was about to happen? And so he invented this machine. This is the machine. Now, obviously, he didn't use PVC. But I just made this one day with parts from Home Depot. And you can make one yourself. And it's called, it has 3 different names. It's called Gordon's bells, Franklin's bells, or lightning bells. None of which actually have the name of the guy who invented it, who was German. But that's okay. The idea is this. You have these bells. Sounds pretty good, huh? That is actually just a copper piece of pipe. But what the heck, it makes sounds like a good bell. When lightning is nearby, you want the bells to ring. Okay, sounds reasonable. Now, I don't have any lightning with me, unfortunately. Back in the day, they thought lightning was a liquid and you could actually carry it around in a bottle. But instead, I do have a machine that will fill bottles with lightning. And that's this machine. This machine is called a Wimshurst machine. It's actually not contemporary to Benjamin Franklin. It's from about 100 years later. There were all kinds of electric toys back in the 17th and 18th centuries. They knew that from taking amber, say something like amber and animal fur, you could rub them together and get a spark. And they made all kinds of friction toys. This is a more advanced one. This came about based on experiments of trying to store electricity. And they thought electricity was a liquid. And they would try to store it in jars. In fact, the jars were filled with alcohol because alcohol is a solvent. And you can store and capture almost anything in alcohol. And they were trying to apply this principle to electricity. It turns out they were wrong. Electricity is not a liquid. But the jars work. What are the jars called? Anyone know the name of the jars? These are the jars right here.
Leyden jars?
Yes. Excuse me. They're Leyden jars named after a town in the Netherlands, not after any person. Leyden jars are not, they're technically capacitors. Anyone want to explain the difference between a capacitor and a battery? Yes, sir.
A capacitor will store electricity.
Yes.
But you then later release it.
Mm-hmm.
And it also can regulate voltage throughout various electrical circuits, whereas a battery just stores the electricity to release it.
That's basically it. In practical terms, if you're working with electronics or whatever, a capacitor releases all of its energy at once, whereas a battery will trickle it out at a steady pace. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that. Well, Franklin did not discover electricity or even discover the relationship between lightning and electricity. What he did do is name something that you're all familiar with, and that is a battery. James Randi would call it a battery because he's from Toronto. But a battery. And the fascinating thing is, why did he come up with the term battery? And I'll just tell you because I'm short on time. Leyden jars, when you put them in series, actually store more energy. When you put them in series, they look like cannons. And a group of cannons is called a battery. Ever been to southern Manhattan? Battery Park, named for the batteries there. In Vermont, there's a battery park as well, in Burlington. So that's where the word battery comes from. It comes from a group of cells. So what we have here is a way to make lightning, and let's see if I can get this to work. Now, you often have to adjust this, the humidity of the room matters, all that kind of stuff. I have a crank here, and what the crank is doing is counter-rotating 2 plastic discs. They would have used glass back in the days. On the discs are painted metallic stripes, and those are interacting with some combs made of copper, and basically you're storing a positive charge on one side and a negative charge on the other side. What happens, though, is as long as they're kept... Oh, there we go. All right. As long as they're kept apart, they keep storing stuff. But eventually the difference between the two is so great that it can jump through air, and that's what the lightning is here. Now there's an interesting thing about the lightning. You may have noticed it has a color. It's kind of a purple-blue color. Anyone know what that means? That actually means something. That means we're in a nitrogen atmosphere. The color of the spark is related to the gases we're around. Now, if we were in a hydrogen and oxygen atmosphere, what color would the spark be? Nobody would know because we'd all be dead. That would be an explosion. But fortunately, nitrogen, we're okay. All right, so I turn this, I get lightning. Good enough. Now I've created a problem where I need to interact with this thing and I'm going to get electrocuted. You grab the plastic part. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now it's discharged and it's safe. Yes. Safe. So I'm going to take one of these. I'm going to move these far apart. Take this electrode here and put it on here. And this one here and put it on here. Try to run these awkward cables so I don't break anything. All right. So now, what have I made here? I mean, this doesn't make any sense, right? If you look at this, I've got these wires coming from these two things, and they're going to these metal things here. Okay. There are no wires attaching those two things. This thing in the middle is just a screw, and this is a piece of string. It is not conductive. It's just a piece of string. So what's going to happen? Well, you can kind of figure out what's going to happen, but try to think about why it happens. Now, if you're up close, you might hear something. Tell them what you hear. Crackling, static. That's right. Electricity is leaking out. It's getting very angry. Let me move these a little closer together. There we go. Okay. Like I said, I have to adjust this a bit. I usually don't do this in front of this many people. Oh, okay. There we go. Now, a little bit more. There we go. All right, now, here's a really strange thing. I'm not adding any more energy to this. And it's still ringing. That's a little spooky, huh? Maybe it's ghosts? I could have started this whole talk about how I believe in ghosts. But no, I actually don't believe in ghosts. I believe in science and curiosity. Anyone want to explain what's happening there? Good, because that's my job. I saw you wanted to. So what's happening here is it's a very interesting thing. You've got magnets have poles, right? You have positive and negative on a magnet. If you put the two positives together, what happens? They push apart. Put the two negatives together, what happens? They push apart. You put the positive and negative together, and they do that. Okay? That's actually what's happening here, only it's not magnetic so much as electricity. This has to be moving a little bit in the middle. And once it is, and I do this, basically all the charge from these is going into these copper things. And one's positive and one's negative. Now the object in the middle is neutral, but nothing's ever actually neutral. So it's always going to be a little bit positive or a little bit negative. So let's say the red one's positive and the black one's negative. And let's say that this screw has a little bit of a negative charge. Well, it's going to be attracted to the positive one, so it's going to pull it over. But what happens the moment that screw hits the positive bell? It becomes positive. And what do two positives do? They're like, screw you, get away from me. And it throws it across the other side into the welcoming arms of the negative bell. And the negative bell is like, oh, I'm so glad you're here. Like, wait, you're negative too. Get away from me. And they fight back and forth. There's one piece of the puzzle we haven't solved yet, though. Why does it keep working when I stop spinning, when I'm not cranking it? And that's the Leyden jars. The Leyden jars are actually storing power. So when I'm cranking this, I'm actually charging a battery, and that's giving it the power. So Franklin has the name for this, Franklin's bells. If you Google Franklin's bells, you'll see this or another version of it. There's one with 3 bells. It's the same idea. And Franklin solved his problem, right? Franklin has found a lightning detector, because if this were outside and you didn't have this machine, but instead had that really tall rod and that other one in the house, once the differential between them was enough, and that's what causes lightning, it's a big differential, the bell would ring in the house, and you'd be like, great, there's lightning coming, let's stay inside. Except you've done something that may not be a great thing, and that is this. you've invited the lightning in your house. Because once the charge gets good enough, you see the lightning happens here. And maybe having the lightning in your house isn't the greatest thing. And that's probably why we don't have lightning detectors like this in our houses. So, Franklin's bells, wind search machine. I'm going to be at the table afterwards, and I'll be happy to show you more of this or any of the other things. But curiosity to me is all about facts plus story and context. I could have just demonstrated this. I could have explained all the physics to you, which I honestly don't understand, because I'm not a physicist. I'm a curious person. And to me, curiosity requires story. And so I hope you enjoy my little story here. Does anyone have any questions about this? I could take a couple questions. No? Okay. Yes? Someone has a question. I can tell. Yes. I heard something. No? All right. Well, anyway, if you would like to demonstrate this yourself, if you would like to experience an 80,000 volt shock at the table upstairs, yes.
What is the College of Curiosity?
College of Curiosity is a virtual organization. It is not a school. It is not something you can get a degree from. It's a college in the term of like the College of Surgeons, a group of people. Okay, I used the collegiate font to make it look like it was a college. But it's really just a group of like-minded people. And if you are a curious person, you are a member of the College of Curiosity. You wish to explore the world, and you wish to avoid dogma, and see things for what they are, and always look for more. So that's all.
Do you guys do things?
Yes, we, I do travel around and do these shows. I will often go to conferences and set up a table at the conferences and things like that. One of the big things we do is trips. I take people around the world and do tours a little bit differently. So we just came back from Scandinavia. We did Iceland, so I get this right. Iceland, Sweden, Finland, Russia, Latvia, Estonia, and Denmark. And so we went to all those places on a ship, and then we did tours that were a little bit different than what the tourists would do. We focused on different things with an air of curiosity. And we have downtime on the ship. We do things like this. Or we do experiments with vision, optical illusions, or we've made those dragons and hexaflexagons. If you haven't seen the dragons on the table up there, make sure you make one afterward. That's I believe Jerry Andrus invented the dragon, but it was for Gathering for Gardner.
That's right.
They're amazing, and it's a great illustration of how what we see in the world is actually a construct in our brains. It's not actually what's there, and that is a key concept of curiosity. So, thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Jeff. Can I help?
Nope. I'm going to just try not to shock myself. I'll just put this over here for now. Okay. There's a lovely table there if you'd like to use it.
Unfortunately, I have no idea how to follow that. I have no props and no need for that table. Except maybe to stand on.
You have dead fish and jelly beans. Dead fish and jelly beans.
I do have both. Well, actually, not with me. But I don't think you want the dead fish as a prop.
You've really let us down, Sarah. All right. So, our final speaker of the evening, before we get to the hands-on demonstrations, is here from the Department of Mathematics. Dr. Sara Jensen will be speaking on dead fish and jelly beans.
All right, sure.
Welcome, Sarah.
That's not up there.
Good technical problem, so I can get upstairs.
Okay, perfect. Now it's up there. Dead fish and jelly beans. So I have my own little version of a ghost story to tell you first. I'm going to give you an example of something I think of as spooky science, and then we're going to get into what I really think of as spooky science. So I read this study the other day, something that was conducted at Dartmouth College about a researcher who went out and purchased a salmon, and this salmon happened to be bereft of life. And salmon had passed on. It was in a better place. And the better place happened to be an fMRI machine. The salmon. And this salmon was then shown a series of pictures, some of people who were happy, people who were sad, people who were excited or terrified. Maybe they had seen a ghost, I don't know. And the salmon was then asked, what emotion is this human experiencing? And after the salmon did nothing, they would move on to the next picture and ask the salmon again, what emotion is this human experiencing? And so on and so forth. Now, that's not spooky, that's very silly. But what was spooky was that upon studying the results of the fMRI scan, they found that there was activity in the salmon's brain while being asked these questions. And so it appeared as though the salmon, the ex-salmon, the salmon who was pushing up daisies, this salmon was thinking about human emotion, even from the beyond. So let's go on a different path, and we'll return to the salmon, I swear. We'll get back there. Dr. Barnhart, he is a very dubious individual. I want to talk about what is science and how it is conducted so I can tell you what's actually terrifying about that. So suppose Dr. Barnhart hands you a quarter. It looks like a quarter, smells like a quarter, tastes like a quarter. But I don't trust Dr. Barnhart. He is a magician. I believe that this coin is a bad coin that's rigged to come up all heads or all tails or something of that nature so that he can do magic tricks to try to fool you. But it looks like a quarter and it smells like a quarter and it tastes like a quarter. So how do I know if this quarter is a real quarter or a faulty quarter? For real, how do I know? You have to play along. Go spend it. I flip it, exactly. You flip it. You flip it. How many times? Once? 5? Yeah, it's a good question. How many times do I flip it? I don't really actually know. Once is probably not enough. I don't know if it should come up heads or if it should come up tails. So 1 is no evidence of anything, really. But if I flip it a lot, then I will probably get a feeling for if it's coming up heads or tails more than it really ought to. A better question is, if I'm going to flip it a lot, then how many times do I need to see either heads or tails to be really convinced that this is a faulty quarter and that it's not just my lucky day and I should go out and buy a lottery ticket? So that's another question to think about, and I want to talk about the answer to that a little bit. So the answer to that lies in the scientific method, and so what we do is we do a lot of trials of something. And we start out by trying to be humble, or mathematicians would call this sort of proceeding by contradiction. We're going to assume the opposite. I think that it's a trick quarter. That's what I really believe, but I'm not going to assume that. I'm going to assume that the quarter is fine, that there's nothing wrong with the quarter. And then what I'm going to do is run my experiment. I'm going to flip it a whole bunch of times, and I'm going to see what happens. Flip the coin a bunch of times, and I can never really be sure unless Dr. Barnhart tells me if it's a fake coin or not. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to assume that there's nothing wrong with this quarter. And if what happens is that I get more heads or more tails than what I would expect to see 95% of the time, if this null hypothesis could only explain what's happening 5% of the time, then I'm going to say, it's not really my lucky day. I suspect this quarter of being dubious. It's much more likely that this quarter is a flawed or biased quarter than it is that I'm just really lucky that particular day and got all heads. So 5%, that's the magic number for the rest of the talk. 5%, magic number. So I don't know, somebody said 5. I thought 5 was maybe a little small. I thought, I don't know, 10's a great number. We like the number 10. Let's flip the quarter 10 times. How many heads do I expect to see if I flip it 5 times? Real question, not rhetorical. 5. I expect to see it 5 times. That's what I expect. But the chance of getting exactly 5 heads is a little less than a quarter. I really like that pun. Anyway, that's a little less than a quarter, about 24%. The chance of having exactly 5 heads. And really, if I saw 4 heads, would you think it's that off? I really wouldn't think it's that off. 4 doesn't seem that outrageous to me either, nor does 6, either way, right? In fact, I just said that the answer to how many times do I flip it was generally a lot. And so if I flipped the quarter 300 times, I'm not patient enough for that, maybe other people are, but if I flip the quarter 300 times, I would expect it to come up about 150 heads. but the odds of it coming up 150 heads exactly is less than 5%. So if 5% is my magic threshold, I have to be really careful, because I would say, I got exactly 150 heads when I flip this thing. Biased coin! That doesn't seem right at all. So it's not really that I want 5% on this specific event happening, but I want 5% happening on this range of things happening. I need to revise what I'm saying and say, if I see enough heads or tails in either direction, because I don't know how the coin is biased, then I'm going to believe that something's going on here. So because I'm a math person, I needed one formula in the talk. That's the one formula, just in case you were wondering. And I need one picture that's kind of mathy. So I need this nice little chart. Here's what I did. I made a chart for you that said, suppose we flipped it 10 times. I could see 0 heads, 1 heads, 2 heads, all the way up through 10 heads. And I put the probability of that particular event happening up there. And so you can see that the probability of it coming up exactly 5 heads is the highest, but that's still only at about 24%. So I said I'd probably be pretty forgiving with 4 or 6. So if you can see the lines and just ballpark, that's okay. 24%, what looks like 20%, and 20% for 4 and 6. So we're at what? Somebody do the math for me. 64%? Can I add? When you stand in front of people and you try to add, your ability to do so drops. So check the numbers. 64%, we're not at 95 yet. Okay? So we'd say, okay, 3 and 7 seem all right. So we'd throw in what's the probability that it's anywhere from 3 heads to 7 heads. If you do the math, which I won't even try to do, I think that adds up to about 88%. Not quite there. So throw on 2 and 8, do the arithmetic, and if you throw on 2 and 8 and you can see the numbers, you should be at about 96%. So what I would say is, if I had this coin and I thought that it was suspicious, I'd flip it 10 times, and if I saw any of 0 heads, 1 head, 9 heads, or 10 heads, then I'd say, I'm going to suspect this coin of being a biased coin, and I'm going to think that Dr. Barnhart tricked me.
Again.
All right, probably did. Here's where things get scary for me. I am a scientist. Well, I'm a mathematician, but I view that as being part of the sciences. I believe the whole world should be a little bit more scientific than it often is. And yet, I think that there's a problem with everyone being a scientist. And this is what the problem is. The problem is, there are at least 20 people here. Suppose Dr. Barnhart was very generous and gave all of us a quarter to flip, and we all flipped our quarter 10 times. Somebody here, what's 5%? 5% is 1 in 20. 1 in 20. 5 out of 100, reduce that fraction, it's 1 in 20. There are 20 of us here. Somebody, even if everybody had fair coins, should flip their coin and get either 0, 1, 9, or 10 heads. And yet, if we're all scientists, the instant we see that, we're going to say, tomfoolery, and say he gave us this horrible coin, when he very well may not have. But it's just because of the size of us. There are at least 20 people here. Somebody should get that result, biased coin or not. And we're all going to scream, bias, we have the result we want, just by chance. He could be a very honest person and give us all nice quarters. Oh, he's shaking his head. So that's what's spooky. What's spooky is that if you forget coins, I'm a math person, all I ever do is flip coins all day, every day. But if you think about the fact that the world exists around us, that means that all scientists are scientists, and they're doing their sciencey things, and they're making experiments. And even good scientists that have good intentions and follow good practices and do everything to the T, 1 in 20 of those would be wrong, just by chance, even though it's good science. And that's what's spooky. It's floating out there, and you don't know what it is. You don't know what it is. Here's the jelly beans. I got dead fish. Now I've got jelly beans. XKCD did this great comic. Jelly beans cause acne! Science! Go investigate! And they're like, no, that's garbage, because that sounds like garbage. And then they said, well, maybe it's just a particular color of jelly beans that cause acne. And they say, science! Go investigate. And science goes out, and I'm sure, actually that's pretty good. I didn't think you'd be able to read it. They start testing them by color. Red, turquoise, orange, blue, purple. Nothing. And they go on. Gray, tan, lilac, black, peach, mauve. They test all the jelly beans. Look, there's one that's different. Woo! How many did they test? 20. They tested 20, and what's the headline the next day? Green jelly beans cause acne. There's only a 5% chance that this could happen. So what was it? Is this the sexual objects?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what he did. He showed them, he had 20 different things that he was testing. Is it a neutral object, a positive object, a negative object, a romantic object? Is it an erotic object? And it happened to be erotic that came up because erotic is a green jelly bean. Apparently. But that's what happens. You tested 20 things, of course something's going to come up. It should, because that's how math works. But that doesn't mean that you have the result you're looking for. That's what should happen. Here's where I get really depressed for a little while, and I say, it gets worse. That's 1 in 20 if all scientists are good, and are all doing good science, and are not trying to fool you. They're not following poor practices. But there are plenty of ways that science goes wrong. You have unethical studies, you have poorly designed studies, you have studies that are tweaked to get p-values. You did some sort of study. This relates to your quote sort of towards the end. You do your study and you're like, this is only like 93% chance that this happened, and that's not enough to reject my null hypothesis. So you say, I thought that person was lying to me, and you get them out of your data set and you're like, success! Like, you have 95%. That's bad. Studies that are framed in misleading ways or incorrectly interpreted. This is the life of me. In number 4, and things that are skewed by statistical abuse. In fact, so I read this, let me see. I'll go here and I'll tell you this story, and then I'll get back to the slides. I was reading about scientific things that were debunked, scientific studies that came out and were publicized highly in 2015, and then in 2016 they were later recanted. So they were willingly pulled from the literature by the scientists who authored them. And 80% of them were for unethical reasons, and not due to true error in being the 1 in 20. So this sort of stuff that I haven't even talked about which is the really big deal. That's the majority of it. It's the problem with studies, with scientific studies. What does this mean? This does not mean that you throw your hands up and declare all science fake bad science that shouldn't be listened to. What this means is that you need to do some things to tell good studies from red herrings, right? You need to read things critically. You need to go to original sources. If HuffPost says that green jelly beans cause acne, that's what I picked, right? Okay, yes, green jelly beans cause acne, then don't read it from HuffPost. Go to where the research study was done. Read that. See what their methods were. Read critically. Look for experiments that can be replicated. If only one place can find that a green jelly bean causes acne, then if they're the only ones who can do it, that's not good science. If this is a universal law that green jelly beans cause acne, then everyone should be able to prove it, and you should be able to replicate that study. And develop, I said I was going to swear, I'm not sure that I have the courage to do it right now. A boo hockey detector for that. Okay. I have to give you a couple examples. I'll let you read most of these, but I'll talk about 1 or 2 of them. So, what the health? What the Health is a personal vendetta for me, only because I watched this documentary on Netflix wanting to like it, and it's been getting a lot of press recently. My kid's doctor is all about this documentary, and that documentary, I'm sorry, is garbage. It is full of garbage science. So where I stopped was at the point, have you seen previews for this? I tried to get a clip. I couldn't get a clip. I was unsuccessful. It shows this picture of like a family, and they're all sitting around at breakfast, and the mom is shoveling eggs onto people's plates, but instead of eggs, it's cigarettes. And they say, 1 egg per day is just as bad for you as if you smoked 5 cigarettes. And it was at that point in the documentary that I just stopped it. I couldn't go any further. I had been suspicious of things they were saying going on, and I stopped it. And you know what I did? I went and I GTS'd that stuff. I Googled that shit. The original article. And I found the original article, and in the original article, they were testing people who already had cardiac symptoms, who were 66 years old or older, and they were looking at people who consumed eggs but did not smoke, and people who smoked but did not eat eggs. And they had the same risk of returning to the cardiovascular clinic, which they already had a high risk of because they were at a cardiovascular clinic clinic to begin with, and they were significantly older than the demographic you're applying this to with children with their cigarettes being shoveled on them, right? That's why that's garbage. If you walk around saying 1 egg a day is as bad for you as 5 cigarettes, not so much.
Absolutely.
WHO, World Health Organization. This is a real study. The results, as far as I know, are correct. But they said that consuming something like 50 grams of processed meat per day increases your risk of colon cancer by 18%. That's true, but it's framed in a way to frighten you. Your real risk of getting colon cancer as a person, even as someone who does or does not consume meat, is about 5%. So if you're going to have an increase of about 20%, that's just 1% globally. So in consuming a hot dog every day, your risk goes up from 5% to 6% of having colon cancer. So they've made it sound as bad as they can, 18, but there's a difference between 18% and 1%. And it may change your inner dialogue about if you want to eat hot dogs or not. That's all we're saying. And of course, okay, am I even allowed to talk about it? The vaccines cause autism? Okay. That may not sound dubious at first. That sounded reasonable when this study first came out. So it's not that you read that and you're like, whatever. But the fact is that when you looked into it, the person doing the research was funded by people who were against vaccines. And also, no one can replicate this study. This would be important if this were true. And so tons of researchers went out into the world and said, can I do it? Can I get the same results? Nobody can replicate that. If nobody can replicate it, that's a sign that something is going on here. All right, last but not least. Salmon, bereft of life, salmon who have gone on, they can think about human emotions? Does that really sound legitimate to you? Does that really sound legitimate to you? Have your bullshit detector on when you read things. Nobody stopped me. I said it, you laughed, but nobody told me I was wrong, right? Be fine with telling people that they're wrong. Be dubious about that. Go out and look it up. It's garbage, right? What did they do? They stuck 20 things in an MRI machine. And they waited till they got a hit. It's a coincidence. It's a false positive. They happen from time to time. And if everything about that situation says there's no way that could possibly be true, it's probably not. So that's my advice for you. Go forth, skeptics. And I have to thank you to this book, How Not to Be Wrong, The Power of Mathematical Thinking. It's not where the study was done about the salmon, but that's where I first read about the salmon. So I have to give a shout out to that book. Thank you.
Want to take some questions?
I will if people have them. Otherwise, if you're like, I want to get up, that's fine too.
All right. Well, thanks, Dr. Jensen.